You're listening to The Big Tech Show with Adrian Weckler, sponsored by Deal. Deal lets you hire, manage, pay, and equip anyone, anywhere. Visit DEEL.com/bigtech. Hello and you're welcome to The Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, in tech and the media, there are a lot of pound shop Mark Littles. People who talk about things as if they know what's really going on, but are guessing. Me, for example. But actually walking the walk, as well as talking the talk, is pretty rare. There aren't many actual Mark Littles, genuine experts at not only explaining what's going on, but who can also build successful startups to prove it. Today, I'm joined by one such example. Mark Little, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adrian. That is incredibly generous of you.
Mark, how are you keeping?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, for the first time in my life, I've taken about a year to stop pitching people on new ideas, things that should exist, and focusing a lot more on listening and just at this moment in history thinking how remarkable it is to be living in a time when we'll all, endure and experience more change than any generation in human civilization. What a time to be alive. And yet we're in the middle of a sort of a Wile E. Coyote moment. We're off the side of a cliff with AI and we don't know what gravity will do to us. So I just thought to myself, instead of starting a new thing that might be out of date within 10 seconds, just take some of the experience I've had and start listening to people, speaking, talking, writing, everyone from school principals to human rights activists to lawyers and accountants over the past year, speaking to them, and then also writing a book and trying to come to terms with hopefully a slightly more hopeful vision of what's possible.
Yeah, what's the book going to be about?
So it's really taking the premise that there was a time when we all knew those moments on the internet that made us feel more human, that technology actually delivered us a form of community that we'd never experienced before. So how do we get back to that? How do we get back to that in terms of the right kind of regulation and innovation, but also for ourselves? Like, is there a resistance movement starting to build? Is there something like a digital civil rights movement about to be born? And I'm intrigued by that. And if anything, I'd love to think there is. And potentially by writing about it, by imagining a future that is not without human agency, maybe this will trigger something that's more like a blueprint for a future than a backlash.
Well, there's an awful lot in that. And we'll come back to AI in a bit. But I'm curious as to, what stage of your journey in your life and your work life that you're now on. I mean, people are fascinated by your journey because you used to be high profile, in RTE and prime time and reporting from the US. And then you created Storyful. You left RTE. Who leaves RTE to do a startup? You created Storyful, sold it to Rupert Murdoch, then created Kinzen with Anya Kerr and others, sold that to Spotify. And you've made everything work each time. So like the Mark Little that kind of we've come to know is someone who not only can see what's going on and explain it really well, but usually has ideas on what to do next or a startup associated with that. And it sounds like from what you're saying over the last year, maybe you mulled a few things over.
So I pretty much worked for every type of corporation, for myself and startups, but also for teams. Like, I didn't build those companies. Someone else built them. The team around me built them, and I was along for the journey and hopefully providing some sense.
You're very generous, and I'm sure you're absolutely right, but you were part of that. And there was a big vision thing as well. There was an explanation thing. You were there to understand what was going on. And then to articulate that, and then to be really a key agent in those companies coming to light.
Yeah, the only skill I ever had was as a storyteller, is to look around the corner at what I see coming in a particular sector like journalism, and to communicate what I see in a way that doesn't make people feel powerless, that actually feels like they have some lever on some lever they can pull to create a positive outcome. And a startup, obviously, that's working toward a North Star goal or a customer problem. In a corporation like Spotify or Twitter, it's much bigger scale. And obviously, you've got to have a little bit more, this evangelist sort of sense about it. I think in life, there's kind of a point at which you sort of run out of active intelligence, i.e. you've got the energy to spend those heartbreaking, painful years in the startup. And what I would call like crystallized intelligence. You look back and go, oh, I was there actually in 2014 when they turned the algorithms on, at scale.
Because
I
you
was,
worked in X, or you worked in Twitter, so you
yeah.
you would have had literally a front row seat to a lot of that.
Yeah, and I mean, the day they turned their algorithmic feed on later on, just before Trump, or experimentally at least, no one knew that this was the birth of an algorithmic internet that would go so badly wrong, that would lead Twitter to become X eventually. But inside those platforms, I always got to see the sort of Silicon Valley culture, which is the kind of spirit of the frontier and the hippies of the 60s. And then it kind of turns into this libertarian philosophy. And also, they were like a colony. So I remember speaking to a senior executive from Twitter when I was the MD in the Dublin office and saying, like 79% of the people on Twitter are from outside the United States. And she said to me, yeah, but 80% of our revenue's from the US. And there was a silence. And I realized at those moments, I had a glimpse into why the tech world we live in today became so polluted by the dominance of these mega corporations, the dominance of advertising, and then after 2014-15, the introduction of algorithmic systems that learn themselves, were out of control of any human. And so seeing all that happen in retrospect has allowed me to have, I think, a bit more of an authentic feel of where things went wrong. What were the sliding door moments? Like 1996, there was a raft of legislation in the US for the internet, and Al Gore and Bill Clinton backed away from doing anything to protect the open internet.
Was that Section 230?
That's the only thing lasting and consequential emerged from that year, was 1996. And Section 230 is, okay, you don't have liability for content on your platform, but you can use content moderation to lessen the problem.
That's what they rely on today, because there's a trial going on in California. The big social media networks are under fire for damage. It's a young woman who's actually taking them to court. But again, the big company Zuckerberg is expected to testify, and what they will testify is Section 230. They're just a
which is 26 words that changed the internet. Like, that was a momentary addition to another piece of law. So when I've looked back now, I see these sliding door moments where we think and we're told, oh, it's inevitable what's happened in the tech world. It's not inevitable.
Do you think we got that wrong?
I think there was too much shield for the companies and not enough sword, i.e., well, if you do things really wrong, we'll come back and revisit this. I think Section 230 built the social web that we enjoyed for a long time. I don't think it was responsible for it turning bad because of the algorithms, but I definitely think it should have been part of a more aggressive set of laws to protect the open internet, protect competition. A single change in law back in 96 would have prevented the monopolies we see today. That would have mandated them all to have open protocols so that a user of one platform could move to another without losing their community or their ability. The way we have with email right now. Like, imagine Gmail turning around and saying you can only talk to people in Gmail. That's the kind of little thing that could have happened to change the course of our history.
Yeah, that seemed to be a thing. I recall a few years ago, Mark Zuckerberg was quite keen on it, and we haven't heard that much about it since. You mentioned Twitter and X. Do you remember interviewing Elon Musk at the Web Summit stage? I remember watching you do it.
Vividly. And I've been going back over it quite a bit, writing about it recently. And he was so modest. It was a completely different Elon Musk. I kind of plumosed him on the stage and told him, there's only a couple of people ever sent a ship into space, and you're among the likes of Werner von Braun. And he said, oh, it wasn't me, it was other people. But surely, the inspiration you gave, no, it was other people. And it was quite remarkable that then, and the guy we saw recently with his, dark glasses, I am meme, with a chainsaw in his hand. The journey, I think, of Silicon Valley in our world is explained in those periods of 2013
What do you think
to now.
happened? Was he always that guy, or did something happen in his head?
If you go and look at Walter Isaacson's book about him, you'll see that what he was built out of was the pain and violence of his childhood. And some of us go into startups and our job is to become resilient and face the pain and get over it, makes us stronger. He's the opposite. Like, pain is what just warps him completely. And I think the pain of all the near misses with SpaceX, with Tesla, turned him into somebody that was less human, I think. He had no capacity for empathy, which is one thing you really need.
He calls it a weakness.
He does. And I think there's a fair point to be said that sometimes in certain business you don't need a lot of empathy. Like Bill Gates employed engineers in Microsoft, not an empathetic company. But to have empathy for the customer, to have empathy for people you're working with, to not just know what they're thinking, but why. Like one of the key skills for me has been in business, has been the right kind of empathy, not the kind of sympathy that we sometimes mix it up for. But Musk has no time for that, no capacity for that. And I think for him, it's all about escape. Escape the pain, escape the regulators, escape the planet, escape democracy. And so I think that journey he's taken since I stood with him. At the end of the interview, I turned to him and quote Samuel Beckett, ever tried, ever failed, no matter. Try again, fail better. And ultimately for him, no. I said, well, Silicon Valley's not scared of failure. He said, it is. It's petrified of failure. So I think we saw under him, as he journeyed through into this now meme he is today, the collapse, I think, of the facade that surrounded the Silicon Valley, crazy one philosophy that Steve Jobs used to talk about in the 90s. And we realized that actually being crazy is not always the best for us in the world today.
He got his ass handed to him by Michael O'Leary last week.
It was, I thought that was delicious. And I thought it was one of those things where, he just can't stand, again with Trump as well, you take them on, they will come at you. You better have a gun if you're not bringing a knife to a gunfight. But with someone like O'Leary, he has the bazooka ready to go.
We did a conference call with Michael O'Leary this week on his quarterly earnings. Michael O'Leary triumphantly, in his element, said there were 1,500 articles about Ryanair. He said it was worth 30 million euro in free advertising and 20 million euro in extra bookings.
Yeah,
there's only one winner in that spat.
There is, but also I watched him. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of Michael O'Leary's, diatribes about RTE or whatever, and like he does this thing where he doesn't even look at you when he's taking you apart, and it's really disconcerting. But actually, when you watch it being done, it's just a form of dark art. I think that was part of the reason it was so amazing to watch him needling the thing Musk hates most of all. I can't buy him.
Yeah,
I can't have him. I can't escape this man. I'm trapped with Michael O'Leary in a cage. It's the octagon. I'm putting money on O'Leary.
I think it's the one moment of joy that we've had from the social media ecosystem in recent years. So you're writing a book, you're speaking, you're consulting, you're doing this kind of stuff. Are you thinking of an easier life yourself? Or do you think there's another business or a startup in you sometime?
I think, that's the great thing about what we're seeing right now is the distribution of power to entrepreneurs. Like in the past, I would have had to raise, a couple of million just to get something off the ground, hire a big team, hire an office, hire lawyers, hire marketing, hire accounting. I mean, now if you want to start a business, you automatically have an agentic AI system there that's going to help you smaller. So for me right now, I'm advising a couple of businesses, particularly in the US. One is called Spread. It's kind of a curation app that's kind of what the original Twitter would have been without the algorithms. A really talented entrepreneur called Jane Ferguson, formerly of Armagh. She's a foreign correspondent, set up a foreign correspondent creator app connecting to audiences. So I'm kind of living vicariously right now through certain people who've taken that big plunge. Not to say I wouldn't do a new form of company, but I think it's more in the area of creating and storytelling, and maybe back to what I would call the old form of journalism. For me, my focus is seeing if we can create a public commons for knowledge out of the back of the destruction of that shared reality of the past 10 years. That's particularly my focus. But also for me, at the same time, it's also to give people an explanation maybe. We have a debate, for example, about, the nudifying app on Grok, right? We have a debate about whether we should buy TikTok like they did in America, or we should not send Micheál Martin to the Paddy's Day, event. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, what about the underlying systems here? Have you thought about what we could do here? Have you thought about the idea that we already have great regulation called the Digital Services Act and the DMA? So I'm just trying to hope people can see that there are things they can do. They are not powerless. They should have a vocabulary to go to a politician to say, I want you to protect my child from manipulation with AI, and know that there's something there more than a backlash. And that's for me where I suppose at the moment I'm getting most passionate, is helping people understand not the spectacle of the headlines we see, but what's going wrong, what's going on under the systems, and what potentially can we as digital citizens, not users, do to try and reclaim some of the spirit of what I think has been one of the greatest inventions of mankind, which was the internet.
Is this where you thought you'd end up when you were a kid?
Yeah, because when I was like about 5, I would sit my granny's in the Ivy Flats, not too far away from where we are at the moment, and I would listen to her as she welcomed the neighbours, the family coming in. I'd listen to her telling stories, and I remember hearing, the moment I could hear someone told a joke that everyone laughed at, or made a comment that everyone looked to and went, "Oh yeah." And so from an early age, I think storytelling was something that was really big in my family. I mean, we had the phrase "you're in your granny's," which meant you're safe. You can say whatever you want. And I think that was a major impact on me. So I always knew telling stories about the world in a way that made people feel, oh, I've got something out of this conversation. So I kind of knew that eventually that's what brought me into journalism, to startups. Inside big companies, I became the evangelist internally for purpose-driven policies when there was those. And it's always been the same thing. It's explaining the future in a way where you don't feel completely powerless, but not empty optimism either.
You must get a buzz, by the way, when you see Storyful clips. For example, a lot of the Minnesota stuff that I've been seeing, particularly on US local news, quite a lot of it, and the storm stuff as well. I see a Storyful brand in the corner.
It's funny for me with Iran in 2009, if you remember, there was a green revolution of young people, and it was kind of considered a Twitter revolution. Iran was my story, the thing that got under my skin as a foreign correspondent.
What was that about, by the way? Why did it have such an impact on you?
Because it is the most sophisticated society that you never hear about. And the kids in northern Tehran would be hidden behind the walls of their apartments playing music, and the most incredibly open society, important. It's the most important Shia country in the world. It's just such a vibrant society.
Huge as well.
It's 90 million people now, but like more than 75% were under 25 when I used to go there. So a youthful exuberance about that country. When I saw that coming on the streets, and Twitter was the medium by which people were getting out there, with YouTube as well. It wasn't a Twitter revolution, it turned out, but I saw it on Twitter and I said, that's going to change journalism. And that's when I created Storyful. Last week, to see Storyful emblazoned on all of the videos that were being validated and verified coming out of a very restricted internet channel from Iran, for me was that moment of, well, again, to the persistence of the people who are still there today doing that work. And that open source investigation has become essentially the backbone of what I think about as the public commons of the internet. So yeah, it's enormous pride I feel when I see that.
When we look at the web at the moment and social media and culture, it seems to me that we're like living in different worlds. Like when I see those Minnesota videos as like they're really disturbing. Alex Pretty shot dead, Rene Good shot dead, but I see two different interpreted realities living absolutely side by side with almost no impact that evidence has on the viewpoints of one or the other. And this goes back to your algorithms that you were talking about earlier on. Have we messed it up?
We have, but I thought years ago it was naive to think once we see the human rights atrocities. When I was starting out with Storyful, it was in Syria. Once we see this, it'll never happen again. If we'd had video cameras back, God forbid, the time of the Rwanda genocide or even further back, it would never have happened. And that was my naive assumption. And all things being equal, I think that would have been the world that would have developed, except, again, turning these algorithms on, these supercharged recommendation systems that are basically misrepresenting and overrepresenting the extremes. So now the social media feed it's stripped away of the friends and family.
Yeah.
It's now purely about grabbing your attention for a millisecond, knows you better than you know yourself, knows your worst instincts, and gravitates and points you towards somebody that provides you with the reasoning why you're right. And the secret knowledge about this video is the ICE agent shot the gun that he took away from the protestant. That hasn't turned out to be the case, but you'll always find immediately, before even the smoke is cleared, a reason to believe my side. And then you're presented with the worst examples of the other side. So that's the algorithmic feeds that have replaced what we used to call social media. It's removed any social context to it and made it, absolutely addictive to people who need to feel something's true and provide us the reasons why they can on both sides. But obviously in this case, I see the emergence of maybe something in the middle, where the Wall Street Journal, conservative, Murdoch-owning paper in the United States, is coming out with its own analysis, and it's the truth. New York Times, same way, and people like Malachi Brown is involved there.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see, I think, a shock to our system to say, well, actually, if this can be abused, we've got to be more
But I
intentional.
wonder, is this the first time in your life or my life when we're seeing the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, other very, very senior, trusted, legacy, long-lived media organs that are trusted by, for example, huge swathes of the Republican Party as well, no matter what Trump says, report on this, point out something obvious, and yet ultimately it has no effect?
But I think it's for a hardcore. I think in society there are people who, for whatever reasons, have been detached, disconnected, some way lost and alienated. I think very much about young men, and whose society just really haven't delivered. And they go onto social media and they find the hidden knowledge that makes them feel powerful. And there's always going to be in a society people who are at that margin who will fall down the rabbit hole. More and more of us, I think, are realizing that we're trapped in our own worst instincts by an attention economy in which everything is instant spectacle. The more we realize that, particularly the younger generation, they're starting to live out better intentions. There's a peak in social media use last year. It's now dropping. People are moving away to safer, smaller spaces, rediscovering places like Tumblr and Reddit, bedrock of the early social media times, to places where they can actually intentionally resist the algorithm and stay out of sight of the AI that's scraping the content. And these kind of little, as they're being called now, dark forests in chat rooms, in Discord servers, in Reddit subreddits, people are living out what I think is a transition for many people from an age of attention to an age of intention. Give me information and make sense of the world in a way that makes me feel powerful as a conscious citizen, not as a user of a platform that's trapping me in my worst instinct. So there's an awareness of the younger generation who are the digital natives, I think, that's starting to be felt and find an echo, I think, in older people who feel the wave of AI-generated slop that's coming will make human connection at a higher premium. So again, if I'm to present a hopeful scenario that we could all fight for, it would be a shift to an intentional relationship with technology. And of course, a very strong connection to real life to balance that out.
Do you know what? I see exactly what you're saying, and I've experienced that in my own family. We have a 23-year-old, and she hates AI. She doesn't like social media, and she is increasingly typical of many of her cohorts.
Can I ask you, where does she get her, whatever she calls, we call it news, but she's probably just not describing it as news,
she
right?
does get it on social media. She does get it on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, but she's now starting to look at RT News and BBC News, and her antennae and her radar are unbelievably sophisticated in being able to sniff out agendas and bad intentions, because a lot of her peers, both her friends and people she trusts online, there are a lot of discussions and conversations where they discuss these issues. We sort of think that as middle-aged people that we're sophisticated and we're aware of this and we've experienced of the world, and the young people are being duped. In my experience, it's often the inverse.
It's funny. I find that the media diet that my 21-year-old daughter, soon to be 21 daughter, has is way more varied and diverse and actually quite social than I would ever have aspired to as a kid. Because just as you say about your daughter, I say to her, where did you get that piece of news from Gaza? Oh, it was Keelan.
Yeah.
Keelan, my friend Keelan, she's really good in this stuff. But where did she get it from? I don't really know. Turns out it was the BBC or Al Jazeera. So I find that really interesting. This horizontal trust, right? We used to have vertical trust. We looked up to institutions and journalists. Now they're looking to their friends, first of all, in their chats. And then looking beyond to an influencer that's like them but smarter when it comes to finance. And then they have a two-way interaction with that person and can hold them to account. Suddenly it's this like horizontal social trust that is actually, I think, as you say, better at creating that bullshit detector antenna that I don't think we had. We kind of took it literally in many cases and not seriously, but there's a lot, I think, of more social truth gathering for a lot of people. Now, some people are trapped.
They have to survive, right? Because if they don't employ that sensibility or that common sense, they fall into horrible traps that they see their own peers falling into. I think that's my theory about it, but I'm sure it varies.
When people say to me, well, where's the new media that's going to replace? And I'm like, what part of YouTube you're not paying attention
Listen,
to, or
I
TikTok.
have this conversation with people all the time. By some metrics, YouTube is the most watched thing in normal television sets, in normal living rooms, then Netflix, then RT and BBC. Now, you'll find, figures that will dispute that, but certainly, the power of YouTube, I don't think it's new media. I just regard it, as media. Before I bring you on to AI, I just wanted to ask whether you think, because there are a few people with more insightful opinions on this, whether you think we in Ireland and maybe Europe, whether we're moving away from the US because of all of this. Do you think there's anything to that?
I think there is, and I think, listen, if you grew up in Ireland, as we both have, right? The US wasn't just one thing, like the US for me was jazz and hip hop, and
Jazz?
It was like, yeah, I mean,
Jazz?
I mean, Delta blues, you name it. I mean, you
Okay.
go back to the most authentic.
You saved it.
Jazz,
Jazz.
bebop.
Yeah.
No, but if you think about it, all of the most creative parts of American society, if you look at even like 1975, right? It's the beginning of the new cinema that comes out of the destruction of the American character. At its worst, America could also produce the most amazing things. The America we have today, is only in name a free enterprise society. It's not really anymore. It's a state capitalist society, right? The American government, in cahoots with a handful of big companies, are controlling the U.S. economy. It's not the United States of dynamism anymore, right? So for me, I think
That's quite a controversial take in one sense, because we hear all the time that it's the Americans that innovate, Europeans that regulate, maybe the Chinese who copy, although you would say the Chinese are innovating quite a lot now themselves. But you think that the US is kind of more of a command economy now?
It's because of the Trump influence. We're now, it's backing away from all the things a society right now needs to do or collapse. Invest in science, invest in research, invest in renewables. The Chinese now is almost an electrostate. Its power in the world is partly because it's sending panels to places like Pakistan and India. It's part of this infrastructure of the world economy that will outlast Donald Trump. So that's where I'm saying, I'm not saying the dynamism of Silicon Valley is no longer there, but it's channeled into an ever-decreasing power law. 9 out of 10 of the billionaires in America right now, right? 9 out of 10 of the top billionaires have $2 trillion between them. That's more than the GDP of Canada.
But the
can't claim
Americans,
that to be a dynamic society if literally is concentration of that wealth and power.
we use that as an example of caution. The Americans use that as an example of pride.
Well, anybody can get rich, that's one thing, but the thing is the concentration of capital and power, and now the government taking an active stake in companies
Intel.
like Intel. I mean, it really is a kind of a centrally planned economy, with the two poles being Washington and, Silicon Valley. So it doesn't resemble at all the 1960s California, which, by the way, had public funding to create the internet, was created by $1 million. Bureaucrats spent on putting computers together in the government system. At every stage, public funding supported the open protocols of the internet. So there's this kind of like amnesia about the fact that the infrastructure of the internet, which created these large corporations, was in itself a public commons. And I think that's where, for me, the United States was the place that the internet was born, because of a dynamism which I admired deeply. I'm deeply admiring of America's creative spirit, but I think that's been perverted over the past 10 or 15 years, and I don't think it can claim to be a model for an open, transparent, mixed economy, which I think Europe has a chance to start defining if it can just pull itself back from its dependence on these large infrastructure companies.
Culturally, we're still going to go to the White House for Paddy's Day, aren't we?
Yeah, and all that is sideshow, to be honest. I mean, what do we want? We might feel good if Micheál Martin doesn't deliver a bowl of shamrock. I mean, that's the kind of thing that will drive Donald Trump mad, and we'll all be happy about that. But underlying all of this, part of the problem, I think, at the moment is that all of us want to have something done. In God's name, do something. Don't go to the Paddy's Day or the World Cup, or let's buy X, or have state-controlled algorithms. And all of this is a backlash that in the short term will make us feel good. But without a blueprint, a compelling vision of the future, we have nothing to fight back on. There's two compelling visions of the future in the world today. The accelerationist vision of people like Mark Andreessen, one of the foremost purveyors of commerce on the internet, Elon Musk, now bought into by MAGA. And over here with the Chinese, a sort of smart authoritarianism, where you don't have any political rights, but you can get any brand of clothing you want in a day, build a hospital in a month, and a railway in a year. So the trade-offs there, I think they're the two very compelling visions.
So where are we?
Well, I think what we are saying is they are betrayals of the democratic promise of an open, transparent, accountable public commons called the internet. I would argue that that hasn't gone away. Every day, people are listening to this podcast on an RS feed that was produced for free by developers as part of a gift economy in the 70s.
But that was then.
It's still here today. It's still here today in every visit on a browser. It's here in encryption. People like Signal has now, shown what you can do if you take data privacy seriously. We still have Wikipedia. We still have all the infrastructure of the open internet. It's just they built walled gardens on top and told us that's the internet. It's not. I think for us in Europe, rediscovering the support and defense of this public infrastructure, I think, would be key, particularly as we think about where we want to focus our investment on AI, which is obviously the test now.
So you're laying the argument here for a much deeper, much more profound structural approach to tackling these issues. I mean, I wrote a piece for the Irish Independent, slightly provocative piece, on why I would not be boycotting traveling to the US. And my argument was that most places that Irish people go, including myself, I have a lot of family in Chicago, New York, Boston, San Francisco. These are predominantly blue cities. They're predominantly sanctuary cities. You don't help them if you stay away, because most of the money you spend there goes to local leadership. But that's me entering that debate on those terms. You're talking about something much, much more.
If I was to say to you the most revolutionary thing you could do today to fight back against the dominance of someone like a Trump, give €20 to Wikipedia. Go out, download Signal, don't use WhatsApp. Go out with any number of open apps that are on the web, from Ghost and Beehive newsletter systems. Just find the information supplier that really treats your intelligence well. These are the things that we can do to make a difference, whether or not we go and spend money in Chicago or Minneapolis. I mean, it's a bit like with climate change, where we all got, guilted into thinking that what we did was going to be the defining characteristic in terms of the small things, as opposed to us realizing that we had to fight for the big things, like the right kind of public investment in batteries and solar panels, which is what the Chinese have shown.
Chinese are doing that.
And that's making a tangible difference, even though we are drifting toward catastrophe because of the policies of major economies. We've suddenly realized that the right kind of innovation with the right kind of backing from the state can accelerate our chances of building an alternative world.
It's a moral and ethical minefield, isn't it? Because in saying that and acknowledging that, we're now heaping praise upon China, which in many ways is a terrible country, in terms of how it approaches human rights. But nothing's easy, is it?
Well, I mean, we don't want to be dependent on them. I mean, don't be in cahoots with a country led by a lifetime leader. Basic bottom line, right? But learn from the way that they've managed to build infrastructure, both in terms of the physical infrastructure, their electricity grid, but in terms of the innovation. They've decided we are going to make bets. We're going to make bets on chips. We're going to make bets on the AI companies. They've had a thriving kind of mixed economy, very well controlled, with the likes of Tencent, Alibaba, BYD. So, I mean, they have managed to find ways in which they built the infrastructure, create a bit of space for private companies. So I'm not saying that we should be more like China, but we should be understanding that a country like that has taken some of the best things about the internet and about open innovation and basically built a little garden for it to basically thrive. And I think that's something we could learn for. I wouldn't like to be trying to have a sovereign internet, let's say, an Irish internet that we could control. That's the wrong way to go. That kind of movement that China has championed, we shouldn't follow. But this idea of being very strategic in investing in the next frontier, that's the thing I'd like us to see copying from China.
Let's just before I just wanted to bring you on to AI. First of all, there is some debate, even in informed circles, well-versed tech circles as to whether AI is actually being used much as a game changer in ordinary life, or whether it's kind of an incremental thing. I mean, there was an interesting piece that was surfaced to me by the journalist Casey Newton, survey last week, I think, which suggested that the average white-collar worker in the US was saving maybe 2 hours a week by using AI. But the bosses felt that it was saving a lot more, and maybe felt that they themselves were saving a lot more. It's I know it sounds cliche to say, is AI overhyped, but are we kind of making too much of it at the moment?
There's an immortal law called Amara's law that we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate its impact in the long term. The internet's a great example. It took 50 years for it to really be seen to have a massive impact on wealth distribution, productivity, etc. So right now, I think part of the problem is we are caught in the uncanny valley of a particular type of AI, large language models, that's sort of dominated by OpenAI and to an extent Anthropic and others. And it's essentially like a vertical walled garden. They're leading us in here to a form of AI that demands vast amounts of data and compute power. And you can only buy one or two flavors of it, right? So we're all complaining about the AI is not working for us quite yet. Well, part of the reason is because it's a Swiss Army knife developed by a big company that's desperate now to get money back. And it's trapped us in what I think
Well, that's OpenAI.
OpenAI, particularly.
Because Google is well funded.
Yeah.
Anthropic is doing fine from what I've seen from their revenue.
Many people I meet are people who are saying, well, why, I've got huge amounts of data and I have to go and get ChatGPT to plug into that data. And now I'm going to lose the sovereignty of my data and I'm just not quite sure what to do. And I don't really have any idea what this Swiss Army knife is going to do for me if I'm in farming. And that's where we are right now. They don't join in. But if you look at the ways in which small open models are being used to accelerate specific purposes, obviously medical research being the most exciting.
Yeah.
You take a proprietary data set, a small open model or open weight model, and apply it to a specific purpose. That is where we're starting to see the world-changing innovation. Obviously, the best example is AlphaFold, which won the Nobel Prize.
Genesis Habas, right? Yeah, DeepMind, Google Gemini. We won the Nobel Prize for chemistry, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're now seeing this possibility that if we start thinking small and open, look at DeepSeek. It's now, I saw one statistic recently that it's in almost half of all the small startups' technology stacks have some element of an open source model in them, because obviously they can repurpose the model to whatever they want to use. It's not a Swiss Army knife. It can be made into a sharp knife. So the point I'm making is we are stuck in this trough of disappointment with a disappointing execution of a form of AI that, is not the only road forward. And you start to see people like Jan LeCun, who's one of the pioneers of deep learning, has now switched sides, and he thinks this new world model of AI that is showing signs of promise, which kind of simulates the world, not autocomplete. So there's a lot of stuff going on that we just don't see or hear about, because OpenAI wants us to think that they're the ones that invented a breakthrough that happened back in 2012, and their version of it, they package up into a bot or an agent, is the only one that can work. And I think it's a great disservice to the potential innovation in areas where we could see real improvements and transformative change in areas like medicine, or even in, the Swiss now have a national LLM. They trained it on all their data. It works in 2,000 languages. It's trained on sustainable energy sources. And I mean, that kind of sovereign innovation, I think, is really exciting, where you actually start to have purpose-driven models that might be developed through public funding, or it could be a university. So I think when we start to think about AI, not as a vertical tower, but as this horizontal plane of innovation that anybody can be part of if they have the right open model and a bit of good data, like that is where we start to see a very different outlook.
Can you imagine the minor scandals and the screw-ups if Ireland tried to do that? A national LLM. I mean, I would be in favour of us trying to do something like I can literally imagine the Irish Independent RT headlines month after month about how it screwed something up.
Well, there's a good example, I think, of this is one where people kind of want safety by decree, right? Let's pass a law that's banning something, right? Yeah. Rather than saying, well, what about safety by design? Like the one question, and I know this from working in platforms, that scares the bejesus out of every big tech executive. What's in the box and how does it work? Right? The most revolutionary form of legislation is let a few good university-trained experts inside your algorithm system with a good engineer. Let's see what's really happening there. So, for example, if the Irish government were to decide we're going to pass laws that essentially make people have ownership of their own data, we're going to do that. We're going to make sure that the OpenAI must be interoperable with other systems, i.e. you could build your own little model and then still go over and use the other model over here. So this idea that there should be no walled gardens would be a great first step. Government doesn't have to pick the winner. It just has to find the people with the right data, the right vision, and decentralize and distribute power to them. And then that's the secret of real innovation on the internet, and has been for the last half century. It's just we've forgotten that.
Just finally on AI, I remember years ago, Google had its motto of "Don't be evil," and there was a sense in Silicon Valley that these guys were trying to be decent and they were trying to be good guys, and we do see that a little bit from Anthropic. So Anthropic has its constitution. I think it updated it last week, and it uses words like safe, ethical, helpful. I interviewed, it wasn't Darius, I interviewed Jack Clark, one of the co-founders, about this about 2 or 3 years ago, and he made a lot of this. First of all, I'm wondering whether you think that is similar to the early days of the Googles and whether that will evolve over time. And then second, how do we think about that and a model like Anthropic in the era of Grok, for example?
So look at the business models. OpenAI now has embraced advertising in the last week, right? Which is the original sin of Google. OpenAI is different to Anthropic because Anthropic is an enterprise product. It's selling subscriptions to people like me. I use Claude and it helps me by saying to me why I'm wrong. So I train Claude to say, hey, I have an idea about why the internet went wrong in 1986. Am I right? And it'll come back and say, no, you're wrong.
So it doesn't keep saying, yes, you're fantastic.
No. Now, it has slipped up. I did ask it once about, could you find all the information ever published about Storyful and its use of machine learning in the early days? It came back and said, Storyful was a pioneer of machine learning from 2012. Can you offer me citations? No. But go check out writings by Mark Little, the founder. I am Mark Little.
Brilliant.
Oh, sorry. It's like a kid who's walking into your front room with chocolate over their face saying, I didn't eat the chocolate. So they will break your heart, but I think business models and incentives explain everything. If you're in the business of advertising and AI, your job is to capture and basically keep people trapped. If you're in the enterprise business or subscription business, it's lifetime value. Like Spotify, for example, is different algorithms because it needs you to stay with it over time, lifetime value. Similarly with Anthropic. When Anthropic decides to go into advertising, that's when I junk it. So I think look at the incentives. They'll tell you everything. And I think right now, obviously, OpenAI is caught in this quarterly cycle that Twitter was caught in, where we're building systems for the future, but it's looking forward to the next 3 weeks. And it has to make all this money back. So that short-termism with a technology that will only really pan out over decades is where the biggest danger is.
Mark, it's been a fascinating conversation. It always is. You're very good to come
listen,
in.
I remember our very first conversation. It seems like an era ago, like 2017.
You were on the first episode of the Big Tech Show many, many years ago, 9 years ago, and here we are, and here I am, a pound shop.
Well, no, listen, thank you. I've got more out of your work over the years, I think, than you probably ever would get from.
Okay, and I think we'll cut it there. Mark Little, thank you so much. But when's the book? You said it's the autumn?
Yeah, hoping about mid-September. And right now just finishing up. But the problem is always like I'm writing about the future at a time when
it's still being set.
Like, by lunchtime,
next week.
Things change. So we'll see.
Okay, JJ Clark produced this episode. Gav Hennessy was on sound. I'm Adrian Weckler, and you've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.